Hello. Our guest today is not only a technologist but also a serial entrepreneur who has helped many chief digital officers build reliable digital platforms. I'm thrilled to be joined by Satish Kumar, SVP and Global Head of Platforms at Microland. With over 29 years of experience across various roles, including being CTO, VP of Engineering, and co founding two technology companies, Satish is an innovator who has helped shape cutting edge platforms across education and banking sector. He has a knack for creating high performance mission critical systems. Today at Microland, he leads the platforms group responsible for designing and building Microland's IP, a full stack monitoring and management platform. Let's dive into his journey and learn from his insights. Satish, welcome to the show.
Thank you, KK. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. If someone who's tuned in to watch our show today, what would they be learning in the next few minutes of our conversation?
What we're going to talk about is about making digital infrastructure resilient. Get down into understanding what automated ops is, what we need to do to actually make it work.
Let's begin with your way of articulating what is automated ops.
Normally, when we automate things, we are taking processes designed to be executed by human beings, so manual processes, and bringing in automation to make those processes more efficient. That's the normal scope of automation. Now, the challenge with that is those processes are designed to work at a certain scale and a certain speed, which is the human scale of working with things. But if you want to have the same kind of resilience which your web scale companies, your Googles and Facebooks and LinkedIn's actually have, you can't you can't basically build that kind of scale on human centric processes, right? We need to learn from how those people run their infrastructure and run their systems, right? That so-called Google like reliability in a way, right? And key to that is to actually invert the paradigm. It is to have operations almost completely executed by automation with the human being supporting the automation rather than the other way around. It is automating manual ops is people do most of the work and automation assists them. But automated ops is where automation does most of the work. The human being supports the automation.
Why would I need an automated ops?
If you look at digital businesses today and many of the people whom we talk with, whom we interact with on a regular basis, as digital businesses become more and more consumer facing, what happens is that consumer experience starts becoming extremely critical to the business success. So when that experience falters, right, people will stop interacting with that business and jump to their rival. Right. That's one of the very interesting characteristics about the digital world which we live in. In the earlier world, if you were a bank, for example, or a financial industry, you could more or less rely on the loyalty of your customers. In the digital world, it's more consumers than customers. Loyalty is as long as you deliver an unfaltering experience. Therefore, being able to deliver that unfaltering experience all the time starts becoming very, very important. Right? Coupled with this is the speed at which IT needs to evolve. Right? Business is not at a standstill. Digital businesses evolve at a fantastic rate. Right? So you're talking about a world where you have to be extremely agile, where there's a lot of change happening almost continuously, but at the same time, you want an environment which is extremely resilient, extremely robust. There's also another interesting aspect of the digital world, something we call anti-fragile environments. But before that, what kind of organizations are we seeing where who have this extreme dependence on delivering unfaltering experiences, right? So anybody, for example, who is banks today whose customers almost never come to the branch. Most banking today is actually done online. Financial institutions, retail institutions, people who run hospitals, mission critical civil services, right? Any of these environments today are become digital, fundamentally digital in the way they operate, and unfaltering experiences are critical to their existence. They just can't go down. And it's not a question of going down. They very seldom fail. But it's also a question of absolute reliable performance. They have to be performant all the time. Nobody likes a slow application. Very few people can get away with slow applications in a way. Right? It's about being secure, right? It's about being safe, about being error free, right? So all of those characteristics come together to ensure that combination of things which makes up for unfaltering experiences.
Is there a range in terms of the scale? I'm running an 600 people organization with IT users are about 600, 700. I don't have any major web scale up, scale down kind of apps. Do I still need this?
To an extent, right? It completely depends. You could be a 600-person organization, but if you are running a hospital,
Mhm.
which has to run 24 by 7, and if your hospital was highly digital in its operation, absolutely you need it. If you're running a prison for maybe a government service like that, you're absolutely needed. So it's more dictated by the nature of the business rather than the scale of the organization. Right? We have seen very large enterprises with upwards of 120, 150,000 people going down the path of automated ops because that's what their business demands. Right? We've also seen very large enterprises who say that I don't need this full fledged, but I need this for one part of my organization. Some of the people in the retail space who are the more traditional retail companies but have an online presence treat the traditional part of their business the way they used to traditionally manage IT, but treat the online part of the business from an automated ops point of view. So you see both options. It's fundamentally driven by the needs of your business rather than other parameters like the size of your company and the number of users you have, right? So if your business demands experiences, then IT has to deliver unfaltering
Irrespective of the
experiences.
size and shape of the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
organization. So, if an enterprise CIO or a CTO needs to assess whether they need to go down the path of automated ops, what are the few checkpoints they need to assess whether they need to adopt that direction?
It's actually fairly straightforward. Are you running a 24 by 7 business,
Okay.
right? Can your business tolerate downtimes,
Okay.
right? Planned, right? I mean, nobody can tolerate unplanned downtimes, but can your business tolerate planned downtimes?
Mhm.
Are you in a world where you have to be able to combine agility in terms of rapid releases with resilience in terms of very stable systems? Are you in a consumer world? If you are in a combination of these characteristics, then you absolutely need automated ops in some form or the other. If you have all of these characteristics, it's a must. Then you're almost a web scale company.
What are the barriers one would see when they try to adopt automated ops? And so, what are the things that we need to watch for?
Yeah. Getting to automated ops is not very easy,
Mhm.
right? And it's not so much of a technology challenge because what's actually happened over the last few years, if I can just rewind a little bit, is that when we used to architect and build systems, say 10 years back, we used to try and bake a lot of the supportability into the systems which we built so that they were easy to operate and manage. But when we spoke with enterprises and when we spoke to them and said that, hey, if you see an average enterprise IT team, right, and if you look at it from a sizing point of view, you typically have ratios of one engineer taking care of 400 devices. And then you have your web scale companies where you have one engineer taking care of 12,000 devices,
But then,
15,000
but then the
devices.
similarity of the workloads are
Oh,
quite
yeah,
different.
absolutely. And then when you ask a question saying that, why is that possible? And why is this, I mean, why do we have such a big difference in order of magnitude? When you used to ask this question earlier, it used to be that those guys are very esoteric. We can never do that, right? But what's actually happened over the last decade or so is much of the ways in which your web scale companies run has become public knowledge. They have open sourced the way they actually run it, right? Not just the knowledge, but also the tools available to run, which is where why observability has become such a hot area today. It's because today you can actually do observability fairly well, right? Building resilient infrastructure is far easier than it was earlier with things like Kubernetes. Many of these things came out of the infrastructure which your web scale companies built so that they could be resilient. So now what's happened is that the technology which used to be very unique to them, which would allow them to do that kind of hyperscale resilient stuff, today is available to almost any enterprise. So there is no secret sauce in the technology anymore. And with things like SRE, which the folks in Google wrote so many lovely books about and made it really public, with SRE becoming common knowledge, how to run such environments has also become common knowledge. So no longer do you have enterprises coming back and saying that today an enterprise can actually aspire to that kind of reliability. And there are many enterprises who either have transitioned into that kind of a world or have parts of the enterprise transitioned into that kind of the world. For example, some fairly well known examples like Costco, who's got part of their organization still running the traditional storefronts, but Costco.com basically runs in a very automated OPSI kind of world. I have adopted SRE and gone down that path. So enterprises can do that. Right? The technology, process, and methods are now publicly available. There's no secret sauce inside that. But the challenges which actually happen when you want to adopt automated ops is because automated ops flips the paradigm around, right? And that paradigm shift and the changes which have to happen as a consequence inside the enterprise is the difficult part. What is this paradigm shift, right? Manual ops, human beings are doing the work, and automation is supporting the human beings.
Absolutely.
It's a world which we are very familiar with, right? Because we understand those processes. Automated ops flips it around. Automated ops says you design the work so that it can be completely done in an automated fashion, and human beings continuously make the automation better.
Or intercept as and when there is a
Need.
need for it.
Yeah. So when the automation is unable to deal with the circumstance, that's when the human being comes in. The role of the human being at that point is not just to address what the automation couldn't do, but is to ensure that the next time around, the same thing can be done in an automated fashion. What happens is that the human beings become the programmers of that automation. And that's the shift in thinking which actually has to be there. So it's always about consciously trying to make that automation better. That's basically the paradigm shift. The second thing, which also makes it difficult in some ways in many enterprises, is that if you go back to why you're doing automated ops, right? The reason you want to do automated ops is to be able to deliver those unfaltering experiences.
Right.
Now, what does your user experience? Users don't experience a network.
True.
They don't experience your compute stack.
They experience the access to their applications.
They experience what you deliver to them as
Absolutely.
applications. They experience your online banking environment, if that's what you do, or your storefront. But that experience is basically impacted by that full stack, right? So it is how that application works. It's about the underlying compute, it's about the network which it's dependent on, it's about the security protocols which you've got inside that. All of those together is what determines that experience. Enterprises traditionally have taken the stack and broken it up into silos to aid the process of operating and managing the stack.
Servers,
Absolutely.
network,
Absolutely.
workstations.
Right?
Yeah.
And expertise and silos inside organizations have been built in that process. Now you're coming along and saying that if you care about experience, you've got to kind of flip this around and say that I want all of these things to work together, right, to deliver that common goal of a user experience.
So you're saying break down those silos with the automated ops. Is that what you are trying to get to?
Yeah, I'm saying
To
that,
run an automated ops, you need to break down the silos of network team, DC
Yes.
team, cloud
Yes.
team, digital works.
Yes.
So if you do so, then who is accountable to run the automated ops?
Brilliant question. In many places where we have seen this, the owner is the person who's responsible for the delivery of that experience. It starts becoming the chief digital officer. It starts becoming the person who has product responsibility. So increasingly, you're seeing CIOs change their thinking so that the CIO says that, look, I'm not just responsible for supporting a business, but a partner to the business, right? I'm responsible for delivering this digital experience. So CIOs are increasingly thinking like CDOs, and they have that product thinking. This is a very large bank, and we were actually speaking to them. They turned around to us and said that you might think I'm a bank, but I'm not a bank. I'm a fintech company. They are a very large, well-known bank. Unfortunately, I can't quote their name, but he says that's how we think of ourselves. And this was the CIO of the bank. He said we are a fintech company. Our job is to ensure that we are putting in place the digital infrastructure which will allow our business to roll out products at the speed they need to roll out to be competitive in the market. So that thinking difference is actually there in a way,
Makes
right?
a difference.
So those are the people who actually own digital infrastructure in a way,
End
and
to end.
end to
And
end.
hence, they are the people who are responsible or accountable for
They are the
making
drivers of automated ops in an
automated ops.
enterprise.
Now, how do we bring all this together? What are the core components of making an automated ops work for an enterprise?
Yeah. So there is a very simple algorithm which actually runs, right? Something which we've been using for a very long period of time. If you want to automate operations in a way, it's the base algorithm. If you strip almost everything else bare, it's about knowing you have a system you want to manage. You have a storefront environment, banking environment, and you're managing the experience it's delivering. So you need to observe what's happening within that system at any point of time, know whether the state of that system is going to impact experience in any way. That's the first part. If you can observe that, even better if you can predict that, you can then do something about it. The better you observe and the better you predict, you can start responding to any signal which is telling you that experience is going to suffer faster. And what is your response? Your response is going to be able to do some action to bring that environment back to a desired state.
True.
No? You execute that action and then go back to observing the environment to find out whether it is stable, right? So it's in a way a closed loop autonomous system, right? That is the basic algorithm of what we need to do. If you break that down into smaller components in a way, right? There are 3 or 4 key components which has to come together from the automated ops point of view. First, of course, is observability. Because if you don't know what's happening in an environment, you can't manage anything, you can't monitor. You're actually measuring the state of that environment.
What is observability? What is its critical role in automated ops?
So, the way we define observability is that it's about knowing the exact state of your digital infrastructure at any point of time and being able to understand how it got to that state. That's what observability is. What do you mean by state? By state, we mean a quantified definition of what's happening in an environment, right? It's almost in the same way as a very good engineer. If you ask them, how is this system running right now? They're not going to tell you something like, yeah, it is 92% healthy. They will tell you something specific. They would say that, yeah, looks okay, right? Or it would say something like, I think it's a little short on resources, right? Or, hey, it's being overused at this point of time and it's throwing a little more errors than what it should be. That's the kind of answers they would give you. They won't give you a numeric answer. So being able to determine that state is fundamentally what observability is all about. Now, why do we get state? If we can pinpoint a state of a system accurately, you can do corrective action. If I tell you that particular component seems to be low on resources, you can go and fix it. You can go and give it some more resources. If I tell you that there are 3 components and one of those things is throwing a lot of errors, you could restart it or shut it down from the loop and ask the other two to do the work, right? That's the whole idea of state. The more precise you are about state, the more precise is the remedial action you can. It's very interesting that exactly the same thing works if you're thinking about, for example, somebody learning something. If you're trying to learn math, and if I can pinpoint that you don't understand calculus, if I can pinpoint that, then I can come and remedy that specific thing. If you tell me I don't understand math, then it's very difficult for me to fix the problem.
I get it.
Right? It's the same thing, right? So when I can pinpoint the state of a system from an observability point of view, I can do something about it. So observability is one part, right? What's the state and why did it get to that state, right? Because the why is a very important question, right? Because that's the only way in which you can see that, okay, this happened, this happened, this happened, and therefore I reached that state. If you have to be able to fix it, right, you have to go back that chain. So you don't fix the state, you fix the cause of the state, right?
Now, could we dig deep in understanding how an automated ops can be achieved probably in one particular use case.
Let's just look at the second component of automated ops before we come into that. So we spoke about understanding state.
All right.
The second
Yes.
part of it is to be able to do something about it.
Remediate.
Remediate.
Yeah.
Right. Now, key to action, remedial action, is to remember that every time you act on an environment, you're changing the configuration of that environment. There are times when your action is just restarting a process. We call those temporal actions. But most of the time, you're changing the configuration of that environment. One thing is that across our experiences, 60% of the issues are consequences of the change, not because the change failed, but because of some downstream action, right?
Or impact of a change.
Impact of change. You went and made a configuration change which succeeded, but something down the line broke because of the same reason. Right? You know, we've seen it a lot of times, right? The most common examples of this is InfoSec mandates a change and goes and changes a policy somewhere, and that causes something else to break.
Breakdown. Yeah.
So the second part of automated ops is bringing change under control. So if you don't bring change under control, you can't be sure about the consequences of the action. You almost want to think about your actions in the same way as we think about transactions, you know, on a day-to-day basis, right? You know, your database transactions, your banking transactions, right? You want to bring the same characteristics of a transaction. Either it happens successfully or it gets rolled back. If you want to bring the same thing to change, you have to be able to think of change in software terms. Not just change, but you have to be able to think about your digital infrastructure in software terms. If you model your digital infrastructure in software terms, you can apply the principles of managing software to it. You can test your infrastructure and you can say that my infrastructure is currently at this version level. If I make a change to it, then it moves to the next version level. But if that change doesn't work, I'll roll it back to a previous version level, which I was sure was working. Bringing testability to your infrastructure is the key thing to ensure that resilience happens. Right? Observability doesn't build resilience. Observability tells you what's happening. Resilience comes when you model your environment as infrastructure as code, not just the compute infrastructure, but your entire digital infrastructure. And when you start treating it as code, right? When you have the ability to roll backs, right? So you make a change, you test whether the environment is stable. If it's stable, you commit that change. If it is not stable, you roll it back to a previous version. That cycle is what actually builds resilience. Observability is telling you the status. Thinking about change as code and as actions is how you execute stuff, right? You need to connect these two together. And that's where the whole idea of hyper automation comes in, which is the third aspect of automated ops, right? It's never that I see this, therefore I did this. That's not how we troubleshoot and work with systems. It's always, I see this, let me run a few diagnostics to actually validate that that's indeed the case, right? It's the same thing, right? If you go to a doctor or a hospital with some symptoms, they don't just jump to a conclusion, right? Saying, yeah, that's what's wrong with you, right? They say, maybe this is what's wrong with you, but let's validate it. That's what diagnostics do. It's the same case in systems, right? Yes, observability is telling me that that system is low on resources, but let me just run a few diagnostics to validate that assumption. Once that's done, you have to build a sequence of steps to resolve that, right? And that sequence of steps is never one action, right? It's like a plan. When you do this, then you say, okay, is that what happened? Then you do something else, etc. Right? So that sequence of steps. Doing this entire thing together in an automated fashion is what hyperautomation is all about. Remember, we said that human being supports the automation, right? The way the human being supports the automation is by building hyperautomation.
True.
That's where low code comes in, right? If the hyperautomation environment requires people to program with Python and Java, low level programming languages, it's very difficult for it to succeed. If the same thing can be programmed as close to English as possible, more and more people will start driving that hyperautomation thing. Remember, the persons who are actually doing that are people who run the operation, right? Because they understand
The operations,
the
may
operations.
not be the development work. That brings me to another question, which is the infra copilot or enterprise copilot.
Yes.
So in human language, instructions can be converted into a code that could help build infrastructure as a
Yes,
code.
that's exactly where hyperautomation is going. Very interesting point. 3 years ago, I've always loved building intelligent systems. That's what I've been doing for most part of my life. The thing we used to grapple for quite some time is how do you actually teach a system to do hyperautomation by itself,
Mhm.
right? And our challenge earlier used to be that look, I need tons of data, right, so that I can train and model to actually do this kind of stuff. But in the last 18 months or so, Gen AI has removed that problem for us.
When you say the dataset problems,
Exactly,
okay.
right?
The Gen AI also, I'm linking back to our previous question, which is it has reduced the entry point for anybody who wants to leverage automated ops.
Absolutely. It's made
Okay.
life a lot simpler
And
because
what kind of skills and capabilities are required? So, if I'm an enterprise IT leader, I'm already with my existing set of teams, systems engineers, and so what is additionally required for me to embark on a path towards automated ops?
two things. While things like Gen AI, right? If you look at what you can do with Gen AI and you ask a question about infrastructure copilot and enterprise
Mhm.
copilot and things like that, what it allows you to do today is state your intent in natural language in English,
Mhm.
and it does the heavy lifting of converting that into code. There are a lot of articles today and a lot of people are talking about very interesting term called the future is agentic, which is a very nice way of thinking about it. If you think about hyperautomation, what we are actually talking about is addressing an issue by chaining these agents together.
Mhm.
A simpler example is that let's assume that you want to book a holiday, right? Or you
Okay.
want to book a travel plan to go to some place, right? There's a sequence of tasks which needs to be done for that, right? And each of those tasks, if you think about it as an agent, then your hyper automation world is chaining those agents together, right,
Mhm.
in some
Form or the other.
forma to achieve that goal, right, of planning your travel for you in a way. Being able to do that, right, without needing to write all those if this then do that if that, right, that plan is being generated by LLMs. There's some very interesting work, for example, which is happening in say Google with the robotics lab, which is actually using LLMs and Gen AI to make robots smarter,
Mhm.
right? So they don't need to be trained on everything. The LLM actually creates the plan
Mhm.
to the robo, and observability feeds the LLM with the current state of what that robo is doing.
So
And the
beautiful.
LLM then,
Cyclic.
the cycle is there.
Yeah.
So, right, so your LLM is actually playing the role of this hyperautomation
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
Now, to go back to your question of what kind of skills you need inside it, right? It's a double edged sword, right? While hyperautomation and LLMs makes life a lot simpler,
Mhm.
right? It does not replace domain expertise.
Okay. So when you say domain expertise, business domain expertise or the technology domain expertise?
Technology domain expertise,
Excellent.
and to an extent,
So
what
and
it
a
means to
network
your
architect,
business.
network engineer
Yeah,
will still remain a network engineer.
absolutely. Think about observability. To a large extent, that system is telling you the state of the environment which is being managed. That's what your observability
Mhm.
environment
Mhm.
is telling you. But it can't answer every single state. There are times when it's going to throw a mass of data at you
Mhm.
and tell you, okay, now you, Mr. Engineer, please figure out what exactly is happening in this environment.
Mhm.
But because it's all machine based, you have increased the amount of observing you were doing,
Mhm.
right? So if you were looking at 5 parameters earlier, in this new world, you're looking at maybe a few hundred parameters, if not more.
That's a very interesting point. In the past, when we look at monitoring,
Yeah.
we monitor the disk space.
Yeah. Disk space, CPU utilization, memory utilization, bytes in, bytes out.
Exactly. Those are the 5 things. So
Yeah.
now you're saying hundreds.
Hundreds.
Okay.
Right? An average Windows environment's got more than 2,000 parameters you can model.
Absolutely.
Right?
But
And
who
we don't look
monitors
at
all
them.
that?
Yeah. We don't monitor them today because you're thinking about monitoring as a task which is human driven.
Okay.
Consumer of monitoring data is
So if a human looks at hundreds and thousands of parameters,
they can't handle it.
they cannot handle it.
A machine
So you
can.
take the most critical 5
Yes.
and monitor that, and
Yes.
then so your brain can process that,
Yes.
and then you
Yes.
can take an
Yes.
action in it.
Yes.
But with observability, you are
Yeah.
saying that it consumes all
It's
of
a machine
it,
which is
doing it, and then
digesting it and throwing state out.
which humans can interpret it and
Yeah.
take appropriate actions. So if I'm an enterprise IT leader and I want to embark on this journey of automated ops, I'm blessed with the existing set of teams, network engineers, systems engineers, and so on. What are the additional skills that are required for me to embark on this journey, which will make it really successful?
One, deep domain skills, right? The technology domain skills inside it.
Excellent.
Two, you need some people who have the ability to full stack technologists.
Okay. So, which means your hardware layer, OS layer, application
Then the
layer,
whole stack.
database. Okay. Someone who understands the entire stack.
Three, programming skills.
Mm.
Okay. So going back to each of these three, in a way, right? So the first one, which is
Domain
that
expertise.
domain expertise, all this hyper automation, Gen AI, etc., which will come into your world, is not a replacement for expertise. It's a double-edged sword. You can cut yourself very easily with it. You have to know how to ask your questions. You have to know how to frame your problems. That's where expertise actually comes in. Full stack is basically required because somebody has to have the ability to look at a picture, right? Is to be able to understand interdependencies, right? And is to be able to understand how something happening at the network layer is going to have an impact on something happening at your applications, right? That's where full stack is very important, right? Most teams have technology specific expertise, but somebody needs to marry that technology together. And programming is very important because programming is how you make your automated ops environments continuously better.
Excellent.
Right? You have to keep building that automation along with that environment inside. So, in my mind, those are the three skills.
So, complete domain expertise, whether network systems, etc., and full stack understanding, which
Yes.
means who understands the big picture right from the hardware to application layer and so on. And the third one is the
programming skills in the infrastructure.
will it make any difference with the kind of copilot and so on?
To a very large extent, yes.
Okay.
If you look at what's happening with Infra Copilot or with Gen AI, it's made a few changes to the way in which we need to do it. You still need to program. See, programming is about being able to specify your intent, other convert that intent into what you want, right? Earlier, you would have to basically write the code which would realize your intent for you. Today, if you can state your intent, the answer to that intent is what Gen AI will actually give you. Right? So if you can say that, look, I want to write a piece of code, which would maybe give me an Ansible playbook to be able to do XYZ task on a Unix machine. If you can state that precisely, you will get the code, right? So that's programming in this world. Being able to state it properly is what programming then changes into, right? The other big key thing which is also there with Gen AI today is that in order to use it, right, you need to be a good programmer in one language, right? You need to be able to frame your, how to program in one language. It could be any language. The task of converting that program from that language to another language is a machine task. It's like going from English to French to a large extent. So Gen AI excels at, right? So earlier, we used to bother about polyglot programmers. Today, you don't need to do that. Today, as long as you can express what you want very clearly, you can program in one language, even if it's a high level language, you can get what you want to a large extent. So that's programming in this world. However, what we need to keep in mind is that if you look at where we are today, and if you're going down the path of automated ops today, the programmers you'll need in your team will still need specific skills like maybe Python, Ansible, Terraform, etc. Right? You can use Gen AI to write Terraform templates for you, but somebody needs to validate those templates. Somebody needs to know that it's correct. And that's where your programming skill is still going to be needed. So you still need some programming skill as part of your infrastructure team. It's nice to talk about, but it is infeasible to expect everybody in your infrastructure team to become programmers overnight. That's a nice expectation, but it's not very practical. Right? Automated ops is not about IT efficiencies. It's not cost saving. Cost saving is not the key driver. Cost saving is something which can potentially happen.
You're telling me I need to ask for more investments.
No, not necessarily. Cost saving is a fringe benefit rate, maybe something which can happen, but it's not a primary driver. Right? Primary driver is making IT that partner to the business. Right? It's a value story. So when you create a business case for automated ops, you don't start by saying that I'm saving cost. You start by justifying the value.
So give me 3 points. I'm preparing my board presentation and saying that we are embarking on a journey into automated ops, and these are the 3 things that I'm going to deliver to the business. What are the 3 points that I can highlight on the benefits of going towards automated ops?
First one I would look at is improving user experience at least
2x user experience.
right.
Great.
The second one is making your digital infrastructure more resilient by an order of magnitude, right? And the third one is making your environment anti-fragile.
Anti-fragile. Okay. My next follow-up question, you know what it is going to be.
Right. So what's anti-fragile?
Exactly.
I guess that's a question, right? If you look to the first 2 points, it's about bettering user experience. It's about making your environment 10 times more resilient than what it was, right? Better availability, something breaks down, fix it faster, predict more, reduce the number of incidents. You'd go back and say that, look, if my MTTR was an hour today, I'm going to bring it down to less than 10 minutes, right? And you'd go back and say that, look, on average, if we get 4 or 5 major incidents per quarter, we're going to bring that down to less than 2. Are the kind of things which are the concrete things you'd put into your board presentation. But the third one, which is about anti-fragile thing, is actually very important, right? See, anti-fragile is the ability of your digital infrastructure to deal with unplanned events, right? The first two, you're dealing with things which you know about, right? It's concrete. I see this problem, I'm going to fix this problem, right? But anti-fragile is when those unplanned things happen, like when the COVID pandemic happened. Nobody planned it. It caught so many enterprises by surprise, caught all of us by surprise. But by and large, if you look at digital infrastructure at the conclusion of the pandemic or where we are today, it perhaps is more stable than what it was before the pandemic. It's more open to dynamic ways of working, right? We've actually explored and looked at how to secure systems far better than what it was some time back. So, in some ways, it's an adverse event, but it actually made the system stronger. That's the whole idea of anti-fragility. Anti-fragility is what are you going to do as part of your digital infrastructure so that if an adverse event happens, it actually comes out stronger other than get completely built in. That's the third thing you want to put in, which is very key for business agility and the whole idea of resilience, right? The first two, which is better user experience, better resilience, easy to measure. The third one, more strategic, right, from a business. So those are the three things I would put into the board presentation.
Excellent. So, from the cost or the investment perspective, do I need to invest on tools? What magnitude of cost is involved in it? Let's say today I spend X on the current way of operating. Will the cost increase, and to what magnitude of cost increase will it be?
You don't have to spend much on tools. That's the interesting thing about this, right? You do have to spend.
So, where does the observability tools come into?
I'm assuming that as most of the enterprise customers we work with, there's a good monitoring stack in place. What you have to be able to bring in is something which consolidates all of that observability, the monitoring information together. Like, for instance, what we do with IntelliGenie in Microland. There are many such tools which are there in the market. So that's one investment which you have to be able to bring in to bring the entire picture together. Infrastructure as code and that pipeline environment, they're fantastic open source models which are widely adopted inside enterprises, which is a good way of really doing it. Right? The real savings in a way, right, is going to come from optimizations. Right? So if you think about it, there is a lot of siloed teams and there are processes repeated in every silo. Right? So, for example, the whole idea of incident triage is repeated across every single one of your silos. Your network team does triage, your compute team does triage, your storage team does triage, etc. Triage is a common problem. If somebody is looking at it full stack, then you can triage across the stack, right? So the savings start coming when you start looking at it as workflows which cut across silos and then say how are those workflows being automated. Eye on the glass monitoring in this world doesn't exist. So if you've got, for example, a knock team, which is basically looking and reacting to monitoring information, triaging, routing tickets to the appropriate people, etc., that team doesn't exist anymore.
It's gone.
You don't need them anymore.
So if I have a team of, let's say, 100 people running my digital infrastructure across various domains, network systems, and so on, how does this team look in terms of pure headcount? 60% of my cost is on the people headcount. I embark on a journey onto automated ops, and let's say I take about 6 months, rough estimate, to come to a reasonable state,
kind of.
and then probably mature it over the period of next 12 months. So
Yeah.
let's take an 18 months journey.
Yeah.
What happens to this 100 people team?
Yeah.
In my estimates, will
Yeah.
it go up and then come down, or it's going to stay at 100 and then come down? What's the rough estimate that I should goal for?
It starts coming down, right?
And to what magnitude?
It comes down drastically, right? Now, this might sound fairly aggressive, but it can come down to, less than 40.
Wow, 60%.
Yes.
Yeah. So your 100-member team that is managing your infrastructure today could come down to 40-member team probably between 18 to 24 months.
Yes.
Wow. That's significant.
Significant. Driving with that intention in mind is actually what makes automated ops work.
It's not only the highest availability, performance, and unfaltering user experience, but also significant amount of efficiency over a period of years. Yeah, I get that, because if the number of people are less, that means the number of interventions are expected to be less. If the number of interventions are less, that means the availability increases.
Yes. Go back to the first principle, right? What is automated ops? Automation does most of the work. If automation has to do most of the work, then it has to replace a significant amount of manual work, right? It's not replace a chunk of people, but it's actually replace a significant.
What is the
chunk of manual work.
transparency in terms of, because if significant portion of being automatically done by the platform or the tools that are being used, how do someone who's looking at that knows what are the changes done?
That's where service management process is such a key part of automated ops. So for instance, what we do is that every action, every observation gets recorded into your service management tools.
So even if it is done by automation platform, still that gets logged in. And on that point, do you recommend a specific set of off-the-shelf tools, or do you suggest using platforms like Terraform, Ansible, and so on?
Platforms. Simply because you don't want to reinvent things from scratch. You don't want to make mistakes and spend 36 months figuring out how to get automated ops right. Right? When you use platforms like Terraform, Ansible, etc., there is a world behind it which is already solved problems.
So probably you can rely on the libraries which are successfully, okay.
And therefore, you have a head start. You're already working with people who have solved a lot. It's exactly the same when it comes to putting your team in place, right? If you wanted to start a journey on automated ops, what would you need to do? First thing you need to do is partner with someone who's actually done automated ops, right? Who can guide you through the process of getting to automated ops. Because you don't want to go ahead and discover that entire thing yourself.
Your learnings, you can save on all your learning curve. Yeah.
Right. Second one is, of course, think about that organization restructure in a way that you're focusing on the experience rather than on the silos. So you're stuck. That's the second thing. How do you get started in a way, right? Third one, of course, is bringing the necessary tools.
So
software,
tools, on that, let me double click this. What are the top tools that are required? Either the product names or the kind of roles that they play, which are imperative for making this journey successful.
I would say 5 tools.
Stack observability.
One full stack observability. You want the ability to think of change and infrastructure. In fact, infrastructure configuration policy as code and be able to run things.
Is like a CI/CD pipeline?
It's more than a CI/CD pipeline. It's a combination of your Terraform, Ansible, Packer, right, and a repository. Something tying these things together.
All right.
That's the second. The third is your hyper automation environment, right, where you can actually write the automation workflows, be it a low-code environment like ServiceNow's low-code environment, where they're going with ITOM, or the way we would actually do it together today, which is maybe leverage, your Gen AI related solutions, one of your co-pilots in a way. Fourth is service management, right? Irrespective of how much automated ops you have in an environment, there is always human involvement. Human beings need things. Processes, businesses are still human beings, right? Means they have to interact with that world. They have to step in when something happens. Finally, you're serving human beings. right? If you have to service request, etc. So making those workflows more streamlined is basically service management. That's the reason why ServiceNow is such an important product, right?
Mhm.
Anybody who calls themselves the workflow of workflows
Mhm.
is bang in the center of this world. Right?
Mhm.
That's the fifth component is visibility and analytics. You asked a question saying, how do I keep an eye on this entire world, right?
Yep.
Keeping an eye on this entire world is where analytics and deep visibility comes in,
Mhm.
right? And it's not just about looking at a few metrics of what's happening, but it's
Mhm.
about getting insights into your environment.
Mhm.
It's about being able to compare things. I can show you the cost of cloud,
Mhm.
but I have to tell you what that means from a consumption point of view.
Mhm.
Your cost is high, but your consumption is low.
Mhm.
Should you optimize? Right? Those kind of insights is basically what you need. So these are the five components.
If I've started this journey into adopting automated ops for my enterprise, again, the same example, 100 plus infrastructure and systems leads that I have, how do I measure whether I'm in a progressive track over a period of that month 1 to 24? What are the 3 or 5 KPIs I need to track?
First KPI, which we actually track, is something which we call automated automation index.
Brilliant.
Automation index is the percentage of work done by automation.
Okay.
So if you're running an ITSM centric world, for example,
If there are 100 tickets
exactly.
handled by
Yeah.
X number of engineers, if the number of tickets handled by automation completely on its own
is Y, then Y by 100 is basically the percentage of automation.
All right.
Anyway, that's your automation index. That's your first metric. Second metric is the percentage of your world which is represented as code.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the infrastructure configuration and policy definitions of those 100 systems represented as code?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the second metric. Third metric is how many of the changes you do in an environment are pipeline executions, right?
So if I link the first, second, and third, you're saying manage the entire infrastructure through code.
Exactly. Fourth is reactive versus proactive tickets incidents.
Okay.
You want to be in a world where your users don't tell you something is wrong. You want to be in a world where you know it's wrong before something
The
is wrong
user
before they
tells.
tell you.
So give me an example of the proactive resolution with an where the user has not reported.
Lots of examples,
Mhm.
inside it, right? You're working, you basically are, what do users experience? Users experience application behavior in a way, right? So let's assume that there's a branch office sitting on a remote site, and people from there are accessing, for example, either a web-based application or something like Teams in a way, right? If you can detect there is congestion on their pipe before users actually start complaining,
Mhm.
right? So you can see congestion. You know that if congestion happens, applications like Teams will suffer. You go and address that congestion, increase the bandwidth, right? Identify if there is some talkative user somewhere who's maybe watching videos or something like that, and maybe reduce the amount of bandwidth allocated to them, freeing up more bandwidth for the other. You have addressed an issue before users complain that Teams are slower.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the most common examples of
Other KPI
proactive
track.
solution itself. Right? This is proactive resolution itself, right? When you're from your KPI point of view, what you're tracking is did you observe it,
Mm.
right? Now, if you didn't observe that congestion, you would have known about the problem when the user reported it.
Mm-hmm.
When we say reactive to proactive, if you knew about the problem when the user reported it, it's reactive. If you knew about the problem by yourself, irrespective of whether the user reported it or not, that's proactive. And from an automated ops measure point of view, you want to ensure that you're as close to 100% proactive as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Only then do you know what your observability is. The fifth measure inside this entire thing is progressively, right? How many incidents are you catching? How many problems are you actually catching? Because irrespective of all the observability you have in place, you're going to get surprised.
Mm-hmm.
There will be things which will come suddenly, and then you will realize that, oh, I don't have a monitor for that, right? Every time something proactive happens, you have to go back and fix it. There is that loop. A user came and said that, look, I saw congestion, right? My Teams is very slow. And then you figured out that's because of congestion. You have to ask yourself a question saying that, why didn't I monitor my environment to catch congestion in the first place? When you ask yourself that question, you go back and fix monitoring. So that next time around, the user does not complain about congestion anymore. You know about it. Those are the five metrics which
So,
I would look at.
what are the potential stumbling blocks to give an example of what we need to watch for when we embark on this journey, which could dangerously throw you out of the tracks?
Boiling the ocean, first one. Trying to change the skill set
Mm-hmm.
of your entire team, which makes them uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore you lose
Mm-hmm.
your people in a way, right? Not linking what you're trying to do from a digital infrastructure point of view to the expectations of experience which your business has. Okay, and I'll talk about the third one in a little more detail. But to me, these are the three most
So, before you speak
stumbling
about
blocks.
the third one, second one, you spoke about trying to change the entire skill set of the people. But if you don't enhance or replace the skills required to achieve this goal, how would you succeed?
You have to be able to augment the skills, right?
So when we say augmenting the skills, we can't augment the skills without adding headcounts in that case. Or
Yeah,
probably that's where you are talking about
bringing partners in
for a short period of
for a short period
time,
of time.
enable them
Yeah,
to enhance your
yeah,
existing teams
yeah,
and so on and so
yeah.
forth.
And
Okay.
most teams, right, in my experience, has got a few people inside it who I'd like to automate my work.
Hmm.
Uh, who should you look for in those teams? If you've got Unix administrators in your team,
Hmm.
if you've got people who are Ansible programmers, shell scripters, those are the people who you should first identify in your team and start bringing them into this core team to start driving automation,
Hmm.
right? In general, somebody who's a Unix administrator, a good Unix administrator, has this automation gene inside them
Are
already
Unix administrators, by the way?
because they have to write shell scripts,
I
right?
thought they don't exist.
Oh no, they do. They do.
Mhm.
Anybody who's a good Linux Unix administrator,
Mhm.
see, they don't have the luxury of working with UIs. They have to actually work on the
Work
command
on
line all the
codes.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shell scripts is something which is very second nature for them
Mm.
in a large environment, right?
Mm.
Therefore, they are your ideal candidates to become the
Potentially.
nucleus of your automation team. Yes, of course.
Step back to the first point again now. You mentioned about boiling the ocean. What do you mean by?
Pick an area you want to be able to prove the value of automated ops,
Okay.
right?
Example?
Start with one or two applications.
Oh, okay. So don't go the entire end to end, all domains. Pick an application, your business critical application, and go through this process, show the value.
Right? Because otherwise, what happens is that you're trying to do too much at the same point of time. If you're a large enterprise, you're running 250
No,
applications,
impossible.
impossible. You will spend the next 5 years creating a change management plan.
So in that way, you can also handpick a specific set of people who will join you
In
or,
the journey.
enable you in this
Yes,
journey,
yes,
etc. Okay.
yes. Right?
Okay.
So that's what I meant by boiling the ocean, right? The third point, which is how we want to actually be able to do this and where we are inside the entire journey, is a very interesting way of thinking about what we want to do here. That's where the whole aspect of SRE comes in. If you looked at SRE, right? If you look at the entire aspect of site reliability engineering, it goes back to the whole question of why you're doing automated ops.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing automated ops to deliver an unfaltering experience.
Mm-hmm.
What does that experience mean to your business?
Mm-hmm.
If you can sit with your business owners and convert the definition of unfaltering experience into measures,
Mm-hmm.
like for example, saying that less than 1% of the transactions which we do, right, will ever have a response time greater than this. When you make those kind of very precise statements,
Mm-hmm.
you have a target,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a target which is agreed between the business owners and I. In fact, these service level objectives in the SRE world are perhaps one of the nicest ways of binding business and IT together.
Mm-hmm.
Becomes a shared objective. As a business owner, I would say that this is important to me, this experience is important to me, and I'm quantifying what that experience is. And as the IT person, the CIO or the CDO who's actually delivering this, they have a very fixed target, a well defined target. When that alignment happens, it's a lot easier to actually make automated ops successful. If that alignment is not there, right, and if businesses has one idea of what experience means, and if IT has another idea of what experience means, then it becomes a stumbling block for automated ops. right? Because you'll start building something and their expectations are something else, then it becomes a little bit of a challenge.
So we spoke about what are the criterias, what are the 3 or 4 things required to embark on this journey, and what are the benefits that we should be able to articulate to the board to get the business case approved. We also spoke about what are the KPIs to measure the progress and what are the success criteria, whether this program is successful or not, what are the measures that we take. And we also covered very nicely what are the potential stumbling
Stumbling
blocks.
blocks, absolutely.
Excellent. Anything else that you want to share?
I increasingly think that for most businesses, this is not going to be an option anymore, right? It's going to be a need. You have to start thinking and driving this way. We keep thinking about consumers as people who are benefiting from experience, but your users inside an enterprise are all reacting in the same way. Think about your users today, especially when we start thinking about the young millennials, Gen, what
Mobile
they're called,
apps.
right? Their
Yeah,
world is
why should my enterprise apps
yes,
don't work as good as a
yes,
mobile app
yes,
on my iPhone?
yes. Why isn't my enterprise app getting updated automatically? Why isn't it available all the time? Why
True.
isn't it performant?
Yep.
Right? Why do I have to jump through all of these hoops to do anything else? Their experience is being driven by the simplicity of the environments they're familiar with. I have an iPhone, you have an iPhone, you are part of that Wi Fi environment. I'm on your contact list. I want to connect to that. No problem. I don't have to remember that password. You can just approve it for me. Simplicity, right?
Outstanding example.
That's the world which the users in the enterprise are in. When they come to an enterprise, if you can provide them that kind of an experience, they'll be delighted. Tomorrow, they're going to demand that experience,
Makes sense.
right?
I completely agree.
And that's the other driver for thinking about IT different, right? It's not just about consumers and the external world, it's also about your internal world, right? So I don't think it's going to be a choice anymore. It's going to be a necessity. You have to start delivering those kind of experiences. And when you have to start delivering them, then automated jobs to a larger or smaller extent becomes what you absolutely need to do. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Satish, for joining us today. Lovely conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you did
Oh, I
enjoy too.
absolutely, KK. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.